Hello, welcome to the certification training to become an Ombudsman Associate, also known as a volunteer. Today's session will lay the foundation of how the program began, explain what our roles and responsibility as Ombudsman are, and give an overview of the authority we have to work in long-term care settings. Just a note, this presentation may take about an hour. These are the areas that we will be focusing on in our training today. Overview and history of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, ethics and conflicts of interest, Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program roles and responsibilities. Our goal is to give you the information that you need to understand the history of the Ombudsman Program and the structure we have here in Ohio. We will also give you an overview of the laws and rules that govern the program and give us the authority to perform our roles and responsibilities. And finally, we will cover the Ombudsman Code of Ethics, the Ohio Ethics Law, and address the importance of understanding what conflicts of interest are and why we need to be mindful of any we might have. We are going to start out with an overview of how the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program started, who we are, and where we are today. To help set the stage for today's session, I want to start by sharing with you the mission of our office. As it reads here, the mission of the Office of the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, of which you will be a representative once you complete your certification process, is to advocate for excellence in long-term services and supports wherever consumers live. This means we advocate for more than just people who live in nursing homes, even though this will be the primary focus of your work as Ombudsman Associates. We also advocate for people receiving home care, those who live in assisted living, and those who live in a few other settings that we will talk about later. We do this by working to resolve complaints about services, making regular visits to homes, helping people select a provider, providing information about benefits and consumers' rights, and commenting on public policy, among a long list of other responsibilities. We want you to know the mission statement and use it to guide your work as an ombudsman. There is a suggestion that you take this mission statement and bring it down to about 15-second elevator description so that it can be shared quickly and maybe even spark some conversation. Let's talk a little bit about what makes the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program unique. You should have received a document called Unique Characteristics of the Ombudsman Program. Please find that document and spend about 5 minutes or so reviewing it and jotting down some notes or questions or anything that surprises you about the content. We'll be walking through the many characteristics outlined once everyone talks a few minutes and to look over. Takes a few minutes to look it over. Once you have finished going over the document, please restart the program. Thank you. Now we will go over each one of the unique characteristics of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. Please feel free to send me an email with any thoughts or questions you have about these characteristics as we make our way through them, and I will respond to you immediately. This section describes the entire scope of long-term care ombudsman work, So while some of these characteristics won't apply to you as a volunteers or ombudsman associates, it is still important to understand what makes us different from other types of ombudsmen. We're going to begin at the top with an icon of the state ombudsman steering our ship. Each state has an office of the state long-term care ombudsman, headed by a full-time state long-term care ombudsman who directs the program statewide. In Ohio, our state ombudsman is Jackie DeGenova. And as our state ombudsman, she designates staff and volunteers as representatives to directly serve residents. The state ombudsman hosts webinars several times a year for volunteers, and you will be invited to other continuing education opportunities and will get to meet the entire staff. Maybe not all at once. The program has specific conflict of interest provisions. That's the yield sign right here, or road sign. I think it's a yield sign. You recall going through a conflict of interest screening before beginning training, and will do so at least annually for as long as you remain an ombudsman. We ask things like, have you or any members of your immediate family or household ever been employed by a long-term care provider? And do you have a member of the immediate family or household that is living in a long-term care facility or is a recipient of long-term care services? We ask about these things so that we can ensure that residents have access to effective, independent, and credible ombudsman services. Let me give you an example. If an ombudsman's spouse takes a job in a nursing home that the ombudsman is assigned to, there is the potential that that ombudsman may acquire a different feeling or viewpoint about the facility. He or she may learn about the facility from their spouse, that could cloud their judgment. Residents rely on us to be their independent advocates, so this is a serious issue. So it's vitally important to tell me if you ever think you might have a new conflict of interest. Having a conflict isn't an inherently bad thing, and it doesn't mean that you cannot still be an ombudsman in many cases. It just means we need to review the conflict and determine about how best to proceed to ensure we're serving residents to the very best of our ability. And again, please be sure to let me know. Okay. Ombudsmen pursue administrative, legal, and other remedies on behalf of residents. The state ombudsman determines positions of the office. Staff ombudsmen are engaged in this work and use what we learn from volunteers to inform policy positions. For example, through your reports in the data that staff ombudsmen provide to the state office, the state ombudsman knows that staffing in nursing homes is a problem that leads to slow response to call lights, late meals, and so on. When it's time to comment on the health department's nursing home staffing rules, the state ombudsman uses our information to make a case for changes. And we just recently had that happen with Governor DeWine's nursing home task force here in the state of Ohio. And there are changes coming. Okay. The Federal Older Americans Act prohibits a long-term care provider or other entity, provider or entity employee, or individual from engaging in willful interference. In our case, willful interference is defined as any action or inaction that is intended to prevent, interfere with, or impede a representative of the office from exercising any of an ombudsman's rights or duties. Anyone that engages in willful interference may be subject to a criminal or civil penalty of up to $500 per incident. So what this means in practice is that an ombudsman should never be blocked from entering a long-term care facility or have a staff person require them to be escorted while in the building. If these issues ever come up, call us immediately so we can work through them with you and the facility. In the history of Ohio's program, only one home has been fined, and the state ombudsman has had to write only a handful of letters educating providers. It should not be an issue for you. Most providers are quite cooperative. If you have any questions during that, make sure you send me an email and we will get the answers for you. Ombudsmen are client or resident directed, meaning that we work at the direction of our client. And the resident and the consumer of home health care is our client. A guiding principle of our work is who is my client and what does he or she want, not what their adult child wants or what the facility staff wants or what other medical professionals want. Ombudsmen are impartial in investigation, but advocates in resolution. That means we gather information to find the root cause of a problem. We want to know the facts, and we investigate to gather them. But our main goal is to resolve an issue to the resident's satisfaction. Ombudsmen use regulations and laws as a beginning point, not an end point, meaning that we aren't regulators, like Ohio Department of Health, but we know aspects of the regulations to provide context for our work. Ombudsmen seek resolution to both individual concerns as well as systemic issues. The Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program is unique in the Older Americans Act and Ohio law because it addresses concerns of individual residents, calls upon others to fulfill their responsibilities to residents, like facility staff, Ohio Department of Health, managed care plans, and others, and gives a public voice to residents' needs by working for supportive public policy, which could be found in legislative and regulatory changes. And finally, ombudsmen have strict, and I mean strict, confidentiality provisions that are at the foundation of the work we do. Ombudsmen cannot share information without a resident consent to do so. One of the things that is a huge one is we cannot release a resident's identity, even in a situation as simple as getting help to go to the restroom, or being moved in bed, having a wheelchair moved. We cannot release that resident's identity without their permission. So never, ever, ever just assume consent. You have to ask for permission and get that verbal consent. And depending upon the issue, you may end up needing to get written consent, which I will provide you with some to take with you. We will talk more about consent, the confidentiality later in a later module, and during practice, as this is an incredibly important concept for Olives to know and how to operationalize. Now that we understand who we are as Ombudsman and what makes us unique, we'll talk about the history of the Ombudsman program, along with some of the milestones along the way. I guess the best place to start is in the beginning. Nearly 60 years ago, in 1965, the Older Americans Act was signed into law. It required each state to have an ombudsman program beginning in the 1970s. It was also the beginning of Medicare and Medicaid, and as public money became available for nursing home care, the industry started to grow, but there was little oversight. The Ombudsman program was created out of an effort by the federal government to address widely reported problems of abuse, neglect, and substandard care in nursing homes nationwide. In 1978, amendments to the Older Americans Act passed by Congress required every state to have an ombudsman program and specifically defined ombudsman functions and responsibilities. In 1981, Older Americans Act amendments expanded ombudsman program coverage to include board and care homes. At that point, the name was changed from Nursing Home Ombudsman to Long-Term Care Ombudsman to reflect that change. Other duties were remained substantially the same. 1987 was an important year for the Ombudsman program, with more amendments to the OAA, Older Americans Act, that strengthened our role and authority. The Older Americans Act amendments made substantive changes in the Ombudsman program, including requiring states to provide for ombudsman access to residents and residents' records, immunity to ombudsmen for good faith performance of their duties, and prohibitions against willful interference with the official duties of an ombudsman and/or retaliation against a resident, employee, or other individual for filing a complaint or assisting representatives of the program in the performance of their duties. In 1992, the Older Americans Act was strengthened again. The Ombudsman program was set apart in its own chapter of the Older Americans Act into the section for vulnerable elder rights protection activities. The Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman program was established with a director, and funding was given to maintain a national long-term care ombudsman resource center, which remains an outstanding resource for ombudsmen across the country still today. In 1988, Ohio expanded its role to provide services to people receiving long-term services and supports in their homes. As it stands, our program is one of about a dozen states that provide services to these consumers. Changes in 1990 and 91 set the course for the way the program would operate. The Ohio Ombudsman Enabling Law went into effect in 1990. This law defines the role and scope of the program. Shortly thereafter, in 1991, administrative rules were adopted that outline how the laws were to be implemented. For example, there are rules about being certified and what the duties of an ombudsman associate are, and a rule about how we investigate complaints and document our work. In 2014, the office selected by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, to provide ombudsman services to MyCare Ohio members. MyCare Ohio is a system of managed care plans that coordinate the delivery of benefits and services to Ohioans who are eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid. There are 7 regional long-term care ombudsman programs that operate in the MyCare Ohio regions and provide services to these consumers. MyCare Ohio members are broken down into 3 primary categorizations: those in nursing homes, those receiving waiver services in the community, such as in-home personal care services and home-delivered meals, for example, and those we call community well, who are not assessing long-term services and supports at this time. And our MyCare Ohio providers are either Molina or Buckeye. You'll hear that, Molina or Buckeye. That way you'll be able to key in on the fact that a resident is a MyCare Ohio participant. In 2019, through budget advocacy at the state and local levels, the Ombudsman program received a significant increase in state funding to expand its volunteer corps. With these new funds, regional programs were able to hire full-time volunteer coordinators, like me, and at the state office, a state-level volunteer coordinator was hired to help regional programs volunteer management practices. This was the first major funding expansion to the program since 2005. Now that we have covered unique aspects of the program and have touched on some of the history and major milestones, let's talk a bit about the structure of the Office of the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. We call it the office, as you know. The OAA requires each state to have a state long-term care ombudsman who oversees operations of the program statewide. It's important for me to emphasize the point that we are a part of this unified office. Our region office is a part of the unified office. Every staff member is a part of the unified office. And every volunteer is a part of the unified office. Like I just said, it includes all representatives from both staff and volunteers from across Ohio. There are 12 regional ombudsman programs throughout Ohio. You'll see a map of where these regions are located on the next slide. The administration of each of these programs is overseen by the state ombudsman. The office is housed within the Ohio Department of Aging, but operates as a separate and distinct entity. The OAA requires that the office be a distinct entity, separately identifiable from the Ohio Department of Aging. This includes the ability for the state ombudsman to make certain determinations which represent the positions of the office, and not necessarily those of the Department of Aging. While the state ombudsman reports to the director of the Ohio Department of Aging, it is possible that in her role or his role as Ohio's long-term care resident advocate, the position may differ from the director's. As I just mentioned, the office is comprised of 12 regional long-term care ombudsman programs made up of approximately 85 regional ombudsman staff and about 230 volunteers, and hopefully that number is growing. COVID really knocked us down low, and we are rebuilding to that 230, 230 volunteers. We're getting really close to it again. It's really kind of cool to watch it grow back up. The regions in which these programs operate align with planning and service areas of the Ohio's 12 area agencies on aging. You'll often hear us refer to it as the AAA, so that's Area Agency on Aging. Long-term care ombudsman programs are housed in sponsoring agencies. Some are area agencies on aging, legal service providers, etc. The largest program is a standalone nonprofit which covers the Cleveland metro area. That is 10A. The state ombudsman designates sponsoring agencies and gives them grants to operate. Some federal funds are passed through the AAAs and are distributed according to formulas that consider several factors. Other federal funds and state funds flow directly from the office to regional programs. So here on the map, as you'll see, and as you already know, we are Region 2 out of 12. Okay? So that means we cover 9 counties, and I'm going to do them in alphabetical order because I can't do it any other ways. So we've got Champaign, Clark, Dark, Greene, Logan, Miami, Montgomery, Preble, and Shelby. Okay? You are not going to be assigned to all of the 9 counties. We will talk about that individually. You also have the map in your folder. Okay, so this is our core services. What activities do ombudsmen engage in? That is, what do we do to live our mission? This gives you a visual of our core services, the primary work ombudsmen do to uphold our mission. So as you can see here in this slide, the consumer, as we talked about a little bit ago, is the center. It's like a wheel and a spoke diagram. So consumer, all of these, the complaint handling, regular presence, information and assistance to individuals, community and provider education, other kinds of advocacy, participate in survey processes, information and assistance to providers, selection assistance, and work with resident and family councils are all parts of what we do. Nothing really specifically stands out on its own, but it's what keeps us rolling in our role of protecting the seniors receiving long-term care. The Federal Administration on Aging of the Administration for Community Living administers the National Ombudsman Reporting System that requires all state ombudsman offices to report ombudsman activity. That's a mouthful. Basically, there's us, there's the state office, and then the state office reports to what is lovingly called ACL, okay, Aging of the Administration for Community Living, and as well as the Medicare and Medicaid Services Organization, MCS. For Ohio, we collect information on all of our core services that we provide in a system called ODIS, O-D-I-S. And you can see here that stands for Ombudsman Documentation and Information System. ODIS is a database used to report ombudsman activity, advocacy work, complaint handling, training, and program management. ODIS is a database designed to compile data regarding activities of each representative of the office. Reports can be generated in ODIS that can be used to demonstrate the ombudsman program's effectiveness. ODIS is crucial. Hold on, sorry, got a little bit ahead of myself. To analyzing ombudsman activity for purposes of systems advocacy through identifying trends, quality assurance, and demonstrating program effectiveness for funding. With some exceptions, you will report your activity to the volunteer coordinator to be entered into ODIS. The only way that you would have access to Otis is if you became an Ombudsman specialist, or if you are an intern and you're going through the training to start your internship. You will have access to Otis. While Otis is used to document Ombudsman activity, it is not to be used as a timekeeping system. All activity is documentable in Otis. Not all activity is documentable, I should say. The Ombudsman Associates reports to me are what I enter into Otis. We have several different ways we can do this. The two major ways are we have SurveyMonkey, which I just recently updated to match an old school hard copy report form. I have a couple of Ombudsman associates who much rather use the hard copy than the SurveyMonkey, and that's fine. I have others that use the report form and then scan it or take pictures of it and send it to me so that I can take your information and enter it into Otis. Now we're going to dive into the Ombudsman Code of Ethics. When we talk about ethics, we will be talking about two different things. One is the Ombudsman Code of Ethics. Basically, think of that as a set of guiding principles. Okay? Something you may want to have with you at all times during your visits so that you can, keep yourself focused. The other is the Ohio Ethics Law. Over the next few minutes, we will talk about each and how they apply to you as a representative of the Office of the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. All Ombudsman staff and volunteers must adhere to these guiding principles, regardless of an Ombudsman's certification level or the complexity of the issue or problem which is being addressed. There is a basic set of principles which guide an Ombudsman's decisions. The National Association of State Long-Term Care Ombudsman Programs developed this code of ethics to guide Ombudsman practice for nationwide consistency. Okay. So we're going to go through these code of ethics one at a time. Or I'm going to read through them one at a time, okay? So, just to get them so you see them visually and then you're going to hear them as well. The Ombudsman provides services with respect for human dignity and the individuality of the client, unrestricted by considerations of age, social or economic status, personal characteristics, or lifestyle choices. The Ombudsman respects and promotes the client's right to self-determination. The Ombudsman makes every reasonable effort to ascertain and act in accordance with the client's wishes. The Ombudsman acts to protect vulnerable individuals from abuse and or neglect. The Ombudsman maintains competence in areas relevant to the long-term care system, especially regulatory and legislative information and long-term care service options. The Ombudsman acts in accordance with the standards and practices of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program and with respect for the policies of the sponsoring contract organizations. On a side note, our sponsoring agency is the Joint Office of Citizen Complaints, and we do share an office with them, and they are there to help us do our work. And that office is led by Diane Wellborn, who is the executive director, and currently the ombudsmen that are serving with her are Deborah Ferguson and Kimberly Connor, and we do have interns on that side as well as on the long-term care ombudsman side. The ombudsman will provide professional advocacy services unrestricted by his or her personal beliefs or opinions. The ombudsman participates in efforts to promote a quality long-term care system. The ombudsman participates in efforts to maintain and promote the integrity of the long-term care ombudsman program. The ombudsman supports a strict conflict of interest standard which prohibits any financial interest in the delivery or provision of nursing home, board and care services, or other long-term care services which are within their scope of involvement. Okay. The ombudsman shall conduct him or herself in a manner which will strengthen the statewide and national ombudsman network. And I'm sure that you all have been through Code of Ethics on jobs or any other programs that you have worked with. And it's really no different with our Code of Ethics. They are pretty high-reaching because we have a very high expectation that we are professional, compassionate, and precise when we are doing our work. And remember, always, always resident or consumer who are our client focused. Once you become a certified ombudsman associate, you will officially be a representative of the state of the Office of the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, as we just spoke about. This means that you are subject to the Ohio Ethics Law. The Ohio Ethics Law is outlined in Chapter 102 of the Ohio Revised Code. The main sections that you need to be aware of concern the subject of gifts, and the other is conflict of interest. Excuse me. When it comes to gifts, that's one area that will probably frequently come up as an ombudsman associate. And that would be the resident or the resident's family wanting to give us a gift of any monetary value. Our goal is to help people resolve their complaints, and they may want to show you their gratitude like I was just talking about. And this is where the ethics law comes into play. There are 2 points to gifts that you need to know. The ethics law states that we cannot accept things of value that could have a substantial and improper influence. What this means is that you cannot accept gifts from clients, their families, or the facilities in which we advocate. Okay? I'll be honest with you, we have had situations where the residents have done a little bit of a crafty thing, and they want to give it to us, and it is very difficult to say no, but at least try it. And if they push back, then you can go ahead, especially if it's just, that little trinket, and take it. But then you will be giving it, you will be handing it off to, like donating it somewhere. But the best practice is don't even accept it. Just say, no, I'm not allowed. It is against our ethics and the ethics law in the state of Ohio. Okay. All right. So moving forward, you are screened for any conflicts of interest prior to becoming a volunteer and a candidate for certification. The Ohio ethics law prohibits us from acting on any conflicts of interest that we might have. This is, in part, why we do not allow you to be assigned to a facility in which you have or have had a loved one receive care, or in which you have previously worked. It is not illegal to have a conflict, but it becomes a problem if you act on it. So if you don't tell me that you worked at ABC Nursing Home and I assign you to ABC Nursing Home, that's when it becomes a problem. And the fact that you kept that, that you would keep that information from us, then that would mean that you would immediately lose your certification and you would no longer be a part of our program. That's a 1 strike, you're out. There's no 3 strikes. Same way for us. So don't feel threatened or anything, because it's the same way for us. Okay. Apparently I can't say this enough. Ombudsmen are consumer focused, so getting consent from the resident and complainant is the cornerstone of our work. As you know, our code of ethics includes respecting self-determination and confidentiality. You must obtain consent to reveal the identity of anyone participating in an investigation, including complainants and clients. We also always need the resident's consent to share his or her identity with anyone. Only if the resident does not have capacity can we act on consent of a legal representative or a resident sponsor, like an engaged family member or a power of attorney or a guardian. Consent should never, ever, ever be assumed. Don't jump right to what you're doing, what needs to be done. Get that consent. Verbal consent may be a necessary first step if your access to the resident is limited. However, they do prefer written consent. And usually what happens is that document will be scanned and put into the complaint file. Sometimes a resident will not give consent to investigate, or a resident will not give you consent to reveal their identity, fearing retaliation. Okay, so there's a little bit of a misnomer in this description. So the resident can refuse to give you consent to reveal their identity. However, that does not mean that we will not investigate. We can investigate through going to resident councils or talking to other residents and not even revealing their identity, because eventually somebody will let us reveal their identity. And if we find out it is a systemic issue, that takes a whole nother level of conversation with the residents and the staff. We will explore the idea of consent and how to proceed in investigating and resolving complaints when consent is limited or withheld by the complainant or resident in a later module for this training. Just gave you a little bit of glimpse just then. Now that we've reviewed the Ombudsman Code of Ethics, let's talk about how our individual experiences and perspectives might impact our practice. Okay. Of course, we're not able to talk here, but I want you to think about it. Okay, and write down the questions you have about the Code of Ethics. Do any of them stick out as being problematic for you? And can you give any examples of how it might be difficult to follow the guidance because of your own personal beliefs? Okay. When you write it down and keep it as part of your work, but also send it to me so we can have a conversation. Okay, thanks. So here are some examples, all right? So the resident is declining treatment or otherwise deciding to go against medical advice, like declining medications and bathing. That might be an issue if you don't think that they are allowed to do that, or the family doesn't think they're allowed to do that, or the staff, or even the physician. That resident still has that right to self-determination. Okay? Any religious or other beliefs. Okay? So before I go on to this, I will tell you, in another situation, like with the code of ethics, and having a conflict of interest, this is very similar. And there is nothing wrong with you know, having like your own beliefs and opinions. Nothing wrong with it at all. The problem comes when your beliefs and opinions are different than the consumer, and you actually have to be aware of those that you have that could jeopardize that resident from actually doing self-determination. Okay? If that doesn't make any sense, then please, please, please write it down and let's talk about it. Okay? So our last section for this module is going to cover the roles and responsibilities of the representatives of the Office of the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. Okay, so here's a question for you. And again, answer it and let me know what your answer is, and we'll talk. So I'm going to start with a question. When you decided to join us, what was it about that role that interested you? Okay, think about it. There's no right or wrong answer. Just let me know, okay? It's part of me getting to know you. Here are some of the specific activities that volunteers help us with, okay? So, as it says here, we've got outreach through regular presence, observations in facilities. That's when you're going to be going in and you're going to be just doing that visit. It's called an advocacy visit. And then if there's no complaints, then I enter it into the Otis system as an advocacy and general information note, not a case. Okay, you might help with complaint intake. All right, and we can work through that process together. We have a form that we use that I will make sure that you guys get so that you can have it. And if I forget to do it, please let me know. Okay. We provide information about our program. During that visit, we have brochures that explains what we do, who we are, and that we are a free service to the residents, and that we are not in any way, shape, or form connected to a facility. Okay. And then also we have resident rights forms, so we can talk knowledgeably to the residents about their rights. They should have been provided to them when they were, when they moved into their facilities, but that doesn't always happen, or it's in such a time of stress that is the last thing that they want to do, and sometimes families might take things home with them. Okay, so we can make requests of provider staff on behalf of the residents with their consent. Okay, provide written reports on activities. You can get involved with public presentations with me, with our staff, and go to resident councils and health fairs. Okay, and there is a possibility you could assist the staff with handling of complaints. Basically, that means that you might be asked to go and assess capacity of the resident, do that initial visit, and your ombudsman specialist, who is the assigned facility to the staff, or who is assigned to the facility where you would be sent to, and they will talk with you and give you particulars and what they need. They might ask you to go and get a written consent. I'm trying to think of, basically they will, the ombudsman specialist will work with you in as far as you want to go in a situation, okay? One of the things that I've been working with them on is once they have the case and they're working the case, I asked them just recently to please report back to the ombudsman associate that is assigned to that facility or is involved, the progress in it, and then if at all possible, what the end result was, the resolution. That way you're kept up to date on what's going on, and then also you will be able to help us monitor whether that resolution is actually taking place. Okay? Remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email, call me, text me, whatever, and we'll talk through things, okay? So, other responsibilities we have. One of our things is empowerment, and we're talking empowerment for the resident. And empowerment is the process of becoming more confident and gaining more control over one's life. The Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program has a responsibility to empower the residents to advocate on their own behalf. In fact, we really like to educate them to try that first before we actually get involved. We can guide them, but we would really like them to try to stand up on their own and get the resolution. Okay? The Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program takes the following actions to empower residents. Okay? And we educate residents on their rights, educate residents on their options, and discuss all possible outcomes, and encourage residents to do something about their concerns, needs, or wishes. And it's one of those things that the earlier something's handled, the better, so it doesn't snowball. Okay? Another thing is we ensure confidentiality, like we talked about. There are strict federal requirements regarding disclosure of long-term care ombudsman program information. So, the resident and complaint, their identity, resident and complaint identity, complaint, anything about the case document, okay? Anything that identifies that resident cannot be shared with anyone without the permission, aka consent, of the resident, the resident representatives, or the state ombudsman, or with a court order for the state ombudsman. And confidentiality and disclosure of information is covered in more detail in a later module. Okay? So again, another way we empower is we represent the interests of residents. Okay? And sorry. Through individual and systems advocacy. Okay, so we advocate for them all the way up to legislative as far as we need to. The Ombudsman representatives will work with and on behalf of residents to ensure their voice is heard during complaint resolution, through legislation, and through media outlets. Typically, when it comes to media outlets, and we're trying to make sure things get changed, the state long-term care ombudsman, aka Jackie, will be on the media and letting the world have it. She's just so sweet. I just can't see how she's going to do that, but maybe. Finally, okay, the long-term care ombudsman program is responsible for educating residents, family members, facility staff, state and local agencies, community members, and others about residents' rights, good care practices, long-term services and supports, and the long-term care ombudsman program. Okay. Education is key to empowerment. Okay. So here is a breakdown of the 3 certification levels possible in our program and the continuing education requirements, aka CEUs. Volunteers are generally certified at the Ombudsman Associate level, but some do go on to become certified as Ombudsman Specialists and volunteer as volunteers. One of the ways Ombudsman volunteers get CEUs is through webinars hosted quarterly by the State Ombudsman. These webinars are open to all volunteers, and information will be sent out to you about how to participate, either through the state office or through myself. The State Ombudsman will provide timely information on trending issues and also likes to hear from you about how things are going. On the most recent webinar, or on a webinar in the past, Beverly, I just lost her, Laubert, who was our previous state long-term care ombudsman, shared how the Ombudsman program had responded to COVID-19 and heard from volunteers about what they were learning from residents and family members they were speaking to. Additionally, we'll get together as a group or with you individually, so you'll have plenty of time to share experiences and ask questions. You can also earn CEUs watching videos or participating in relevant webinars that we'll share with you. We will make this requirement as easy as possible for you. Long-term issues change quickly sometimes, and our primary goal is for you to be equipped and informed. Okay. So as you see here on this slide, you've got the Ombudsman Program Director, and in our region, that is Chip Wilkins. Okay. We also have an Assistant Program Director, who is Megan Euler. And then, as I alluded to before, the next level down is, well, not down, but the next part of the rung of the ladder, I don't know what to say. The next group is the Ombudsman Specialists, of which I am one, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 8 of us. Okay, but keep in mind the Assistant Program Director and the Program Director are also Ombudsman Specialists. And we have training, extended training in order to earn that certification. Okay, and the Ombudsman Associates are what most volunteers are certified at. Like I said before, you do have the option of taking the professional development course and taking the Ombudsman Specialist certification exam to take on that role. Okay, and we talked about the CEUs. Okay. So, as Ombudsman Associates, you are representatives of the state office, well, as we've talked about, and as representatives of the office, you are subject to the Ohio ethics law. So, we do have homework for this particular module. A self-study for this module, you will need to complete a brief Ohio Ethics Commission online course on the Ohio ethics law. The link is going to be provided to you in a handout. Okay. Once the course is completed, you will receive a certification of completion. Make sure before you exit out, you take a picture of that certification, save that certification, and text it or email it to me, and I will make the hard copy. You don't have to worry about that. Okay. Like it says, you can take a screenshot. Okay. After you take the course, read and sign the ethics acknowledgement form that is in your folder and return it to me. Okay. I will make a copy if you desire and get it back to you, but make sure I get that, okay? The following documents are referenced in the ethics acknowledgement, okay? All of this should have been in your folder, or is in your folder, because I put them together. So you've got the Governor's Executive Order 2019-11D, the Ohio Ethics Commission Advisory Opinion, Ohio Ethics Commission, Ohio Ethics Law, ORC Chapter 102 and Chapter 2921, Ohio Ethics Commission, Ohio Ethics Law Overview, that was also in there, and the Ohio Ethics Commission, Ohio Ethics Law Outline. Okay. Once I have gotten that assignment completed, then I will send you the next slide or next presentation, Module 2. Do plan on about an hour and a half for that Ohio Ethics Law assignment, as far as watching it and partaking in it or participating. And then, like I said, make sure before you end it out that you take a screenshot of that certificate and send it to me. If you exit out of it and you do not do that, then you're going to have to listen to the program all over again. Okay? So again, a clarification. I will, once I receive all your homework assignments for this time, which includes that certificate and the signed form, then I will send you the next presentation, which is Module 2. Okay? Thank you so much for your time, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me, text me, knock on my office door, whatever, but make sure you communicate with me. Okay? And in your folder, you have the syllabus that I made out. All my contact information is there. The fastest way to get a hold of me probably would be through my cell number, which that is a work cell number, and it is Google Voice work cell. So that number to you is available to you guys 24/7. It automatically does a text for me if you leave a message. I immediately listen to it. If it's urgent, I will answer you right away. If it is not, most likely I will wait until the next business day. Okay? If you have issues with me and staying in touch with you, please talk to me, and let's make sure that this is a great time for you and all involved. Okay? Thanks again, and we will talk soon.